The stars were silent when Captain Kyle Bennett realized the mission was already lost. The Resolute Dawn drifted at the edge of disputed space, its engines humming softly as if unaware of the danger that was about to descend. 42 souls were aboard the frigate. Scanners, pilots, engineers, people who trusted that this routine reconnaissance mission would end like all the others. Quiet, forgettable, safe. Kyle just lifted his coffee when the alarms shattered the calm. 12 hostile signatures appeared on the tactical display in perfect formation. Velry warships. They tore out of faster-than-light like predators bursting from deep water, surrounding the Resolute Dawn before anyone could react. Massive, armored, ancient, each vessel dwarfed Kyle's ship 3 times over. Kyle's stomach tightened. The Velry were legends written in blood across the galaxy. 200 conquered worlds. 3 centuries of uninterrupted expansion. Entire civilizations erased and absorbed into their empire. Humanity, by comparison, was a child species, barely 80 years beyond its home star. This wasn't a fight. It wasn't even an escape. Captain, his executive officer whispered, voice trembling despite herself. Orders? Kyle didn't answer immediately. He thought of Earth. He thought of 42 crew members who had families, futures, unfinished lives waiting light years away. He thought of a small house with a backyard and a 7-year-old girl who believed her father could outrun any monster in the dark. The decision settled in his chest like stone. All hands, Kyle said calmly over the ship-wide channel. This is the captain. Evacuate to escape pods immediately. That's an order. The bridge froze. His first officer spun toward him. Sir, no. We can still try. Kyle met her eyes and smiled. It wasn't brave. It wasn't heroic. It was honest. Someone has to fly the ship, he said. Someone has to keep them busy. She grabbed his arm. You'll die. Then make it count. The crew resisted. Voices cracked. Arguments broke out. But Kyle was their captain, and command was sometimes about making choices no one else could carry. One by one, escape pods launched into the void, streaking away like falling stars. Kyle watched every single one, counting until the last pod vanished from sensors. Only then did he turn the ship toward the enemy. Helm locked, he muttered. Weapons free. The Resolute Dawn roared to life. Kyle flew like a man possessed, diving between hulking Velry cruisers, skimming shield edges, firing until the guns overheated. He crippled 2 escort ships before return fire shredded his engines. The battle lasted 11 minutes. When the Velry boarded, Kyle met them with plasma fire in narrow corridors. When his weapon ran dry, he fought with his fists. When that was enough, he fought with teeth and rage and refusal. It took 8 Velry soldiers to finally pin him down. The one who stepped forward was unmistakable. High Warden Zorath, 7 feet tall, scale high like dark armor, eyes cold and ancient. He studied Kyle as one might examine a broken blade. Curious, impressed, and disappointed all at once. You sacrifice yourself for lesser beings, Zora said. Your crew escaped because of you. Does that satisfy you? Kyle spat blood onto the deck. Yeah, he rasped. It does. Zoratha's mouth curved into something resembling a smile. You understand what comes next. Kyle nodded. Interrogation. Pain. Threats. Information, Zora corrected. You will tell us everything about Earth's defenses. Kyle looked up through one swollen eye. No. Zorath chuckled softly. All prisoners say that. Kyle was dragged to the Eternal Dominion, the Velry flagship, an armored behemoth nearly 2 miles long, carrying 8,000 crew and enough firepower to crush planets. His cell was cold, silent, bare metal and dim light. For 3 weeks, the Velry tried to break him. They failed. They used pain calibrated to shatter nervous systems. They used drugs that dragged nightmares into waking life. They used methods perfected across hundreds of conquered species. Kyle endured. He mocked them. He insulted them. By the 2nd week, he learned enough of their language to curse fluently. By the 3rd, he laughed at their threats. On the 21st day, Zorath returned with a new question. Why do you keep resisting? The warden asked. No one is coming. Your people think you're dead. Kyle lifted his head slowly. You don't understand humans, he said quietly. We don't stop looking. Zora scoffed. And what could they possibly send against us? Kyle smiled, not defiant, not broken. Something worse than death. For the first time in decades, High Warden Zorth felt fear. Far across the galaxy, a message was already on its way to Earth. Admiral Grace Patterson had learned long ago how to recognize bad news before it spoke. It was in the way her aide entered the office without knocking, in the way the air seemed heavier, as if the station itself understood what was coming. Admiral, the aide said, voice tight, you need to see this. Now. Grace didn't ask questions. She followed. The war room was already full when she arrived. Senior commanders stood frozen before the main display. Fleet admirals, intelligence directors, ground force generals. None of them spoke. Some looked angry. Others looked sick. Play it, Grace said. The screen lit up. Commander Kyle Bennett appeared, chained upright to a metal frame. His uniform was torn, soaked with blood. One eye was swollen shut. Bruises darkened his face and neck. Even so, he stood straight. A towering reptilian figure loomed beside him. People of Earth. The translator rendered smoothly. I am High Warden Zorth of the Velry Empire. We have captured one of your officers. He has been uncooperative. The video did not flinch away from what followed. Neither did Grace. She watched every second. Pain. Silence. Endurance. Zora continued, voice calm and precise. Our terms are simple. Surrender the Kepler corridor and all human settlements within it. You have 30 standard days. If you refuse, this soldier will die. Slowly. The feed cut. No one spoke. Again, Grace said. Admiral. Intelligence Director Green began. Again. They replayed it. On the third viewing, Grace noticed something the others missed. Kyle's fingers. They tapped. Irregularly, almost imperceptibly, against his leg. Not random. Measured. Grace's breath caught. She pulled up a tablet, hands moving faster than her thoughts, translating instinct into certainty. Morse code. The message resolved in seconds. Flagship coordinates. They don't know. Come get me. Grace set the tablet down carefully. Her hands were shaking, but not with fear. How many ships can we mobilize in 72 hours? She asked. Admiral Price blinked. 47 combat-ready vessels, but, Admiral, the Velry have over 300 ships in that sector. I didn't ask about theirs. The room shifted. Green leaned forward. This could destabilize the entire council. A military response could be seen as provocation. Grace turned slowly. They tortured one of ours on camera, she said quietly. They sent it to us like a warning. They want surrender. She looked around the room. Does anyone here believe I'm giving it to them? Silence. Authorized Ghost Division deployment. Grace continued. Full operational clearance. General Webb went pale. Admiral, the Ghosts were never meant for open war. I know exactly what they were meant for. She turned toward the viewport. Earth hung below, blue, fragile, full of people who had no idea how close the darkness had crept. The Velry think fear wins wars, Grace said. They're about to learn what happens when it fails. Orders went out within the hour. Across human space, ships powered up, crews were recalled, weapons armed, engines warmed. Deep beneath the Colorado mountains, Colonel Nathan Drake read the message that summoned him and smiled. Grace slept little over the next 3 days. She planned relentlessly, spoke personally with every ship captain, every task force leader. She needed them to understand why this mattered. The night before departure, a visitor arrived unannounced. A woman stood in the doorway of Grace's office, holding a child's hand. You're Kyle Bennett's wife, Grace said softly. Claire nodded. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed sleepless nights. They say you're going to rescue him. We're going to try. They say it's impossible. Grace didn't argue. Claire looked down at her daughter, then back up. My husband would never forgive us if we stopped trying. Grace knelt, so she was eye level with the girl. What's your name? Emma, she whispered. Your father is very brave. Grace said. He protected his people. Now it's our turn. She stood and faced Claire. I'll bring him home. Grace knew war made liars of promises. She made it anyway. 47 ships left Earth the next morning, not to conquer, not to claim territory, but to retrieve one human life. And somewhere deep within Eternal Dominion, Commander Kyle Bennett waited, unbroken, unafraid, having already lit the fire that would burn an empire. Colonel Nathan Drake did not believe in legends. He believed in preparation, discipline, and people who survived long enough to earn reputations others whispered about in fear. The ghost of vision wasn't myth, it was necessity. Created for situations where conventional warfare failed, where rules became liabilities, and where hesitation got people killed. Officially, the ghosts did not exist. Unofficially, they were the reason certain wars ended before they began. The quiet storm drifted through deep space like a shadow without mass or signature. Its stealth systems bent sensor readings, absorbed emissions, and erased its presence from the void. To the Velry, it simply wasn't there. Inside, Drake stood before his team. 5 people. No ranks mattered here. Only trust. Lieutenant Amy Walsh leaned against the bulkhead, red hair tied back, eyes sharp and calculating. She could dismantle a security grid faster than most engineers could read one. Sergeant Daniel Park sat silently, checking the edge of his blade. Close quarters combat was his language. Violence, when necessary, became art in his hands. Corporal Lisa Hart reclined in the pilot's chair, boots on the console, running through approach vectors in her head. She flew like physics were optional. Marcus Cole, the youngest, fingers danced across a hollow panel, already inside enemy networks they hadn't officially reached yet. Drake activated the projection. The Eternal Dominion filled the room, vast, angular, bristling with weapons. Commander Kyle Bennett is held here, Drake said. Dreadnought class. 8,000 crew. Patrol cycles every 15 minutes. Biometrics on all internal access. Amy whistled softly. Light security, then. Our fleet will engage from this vector, Drake continued. They'll make noise. Big noise. And us? Daniel asked. We go where no one looks. Marcus highlighted a maintenance section near the engine housing. This access port isn't designed for boarding. Minimal guards. They assume anyone approaching during a fleet battle would be suicidal. Perfect, Drake said. Lisa grinned. I'll get us close enough to scrape paint. You'll land us on the hull, Drake corrected. 1 insertion pod. No retries. How long before they notice? Amy asked. 47 minutes, Marcus replied. After that, internal security tightens. Daniel finally looked up. And if extraction fails? Drake met each of their eyes. Then we don't fail. No one argued. The quiet storm slipped ahead of the main fleet, ghosting past sensor nets as human warships appear behind them in flashes of light. The Velry fleet responded immediately. Formations shifting, weapons powering up. War erupted. Drake watched the distant flashes of battle with detached focus. Humanity was outnumbered, outgunned, but they weren't here to win a fleet engagement. They were here to steal someone back. Lisa's voice cut in. Approach window opening. 90 seconds. The insertion pod launched. Gravity vanished. The hull of the Eternal Dominion rushed toward them. Endless armor plates stretching like a metal continent. The pod struck, magnetic clamps biting hard. Sealed. Amy confirmed. Marcus killed local sensors. Drake opened the hatch. They were inside enemy territory. The lower decks of the Dominion were dim, utilitarian, built for function over comfort. The battle outside pulled attention upward, leaving this region lightly guarded. Lightly did not mean empty. First contact came 3 minutes in. Daniel moved first, silent, efficient. One guard never realized he'd been there. The second went down before a sound could escape its throat. Amy disabled alarms mid-motion. Clear, Daniel said. They moved. Patrol patterns shifted. Marcus whispered warning secons before enemies appeared. Doors opened just in time. Locks failed quietly. 7 guards fell in total. None raised an alarm. But time was bleeding away. Cell block ahead. Amy murmured, One corridor. Heavy patrol. Drake studied the layout. No alternate route. Marcus, he said. Lights. 12 seconds. Darkness swallowed the corridor. The ghosts flowed through it. 6 guards. For seconds. Silence. Kyle Bennett was exactly where the schematics said he'd be. Chained. Bruised. Breathing. When he saw Drake, he smiled through split lips. Took you long enough. Traffic. Drake replied, cutting restraints. Can you move? Kyle stood unsteadily. If it's away from here. Amy handed him a weapon. His hand shook, but his grip didn't. I told him you'd come, Kyle said softly. They should have listened. Alarm screamed. Red lights flooded the corridors. Zortha's voice echoed through the ship. Kill them. Lisa's voice crackled in Drake's ear. Security response inbound. You've got 4 minutes. Then we sprint. They ran. What followed was chaos. Daniel fought one-handed after a plasma bolt burned through his shoulder. Amy collapsed corridors behind them. Marcus tore holes through security systems faster than the ship could react. Kyle kept pace. Wounded, exhausted, unyielding. They reached extraction with seconds to spare. Lisa flew the shuttle out like the laws of motion were suggestions. Behind them, the Eternal Dominion burned. Drake looked at Kyle as the shuttle docked with the human fleet. You still think you mattered? Kyle exhaled, finally letting himself believe it. Yeah, he said. High Warden Zorth had never doubted victory. For 3 centuries, the Velry Empire had expanded through certainty. Certainty of strength, certainty of fear, certainty that resistance eventually collapsed under enough pressure. Species surrendered. Fleets broke. Worlds burned. It was simply the natural order of the galaxy. Humans were supposed to be no different. Yet Azor stood on the command deck of the Eternal Dominion, watching tactical icons scatter and reform. Something felt wrong. Too much movement. Too little commitment. The human fleet wasn't advancing in disciplined lines or attempting to overwhelm Velry defenses. Instead, small groups darted in, struck hard, and vanished before counterfire could lock on. They are not attempting to win, Zorth realized aloud. His tactical officer hesitated. Then what is their objective? Before Zorth could answer, alarms howled. Internal alarms. Unauthorized access. Deep inside the ship, Zorth's scales tightened. Seal internal sectors, he snapped. Locate the prisoner. Too late. Commander Kyle Bennett ran to the corridors of Dominion, with fire in his lungs and pain screaming through his body. Every step was agony. Every breath burned. He ran anyway. Red light bathed the corridors as Velry soldiers poured in from side passages. Plasma fire scorched walls. The air smelled of ozone and smoke. Daniel Park moved like a force of nature, even wounded. One arm hung useless at his side, but the other struck with brutal precision. Every movement was lethal. Every second bought space. Amy Walsh tossed a charge behind them. The explosion collapsed the passage just as Velry reinforcements rounded the corner. Marcus Cole's voice was frantic but controlled. Security's adapting. Doors are locking ahead of us. They won't hold, Drake said. And they didn't. Kyle stumbled once. Amy caught him without slowing. Still with us? She asked. Kyle nodded. Not dying here. Good answer. The extraction point loomed ahead. An external access bay barely wide enough for the shuttle Lisa had threaded between warships like a needle through chaos. 30 seconds. Lisa called. I can't hold position longer. They burst into the bay as Velry fire ripped past them. Drake shoved Kyle forward. Go! They piled into the shuttle as bolts scorched the deck. Lisa didn't wait for the hatch to fully seal before accelerating. The shuttle tore away from the Eternal Dominion, spiraling through fire and debris. Explosions rippled across the dreadnought's hull. Secondary detonations from Sabotage Amy had quietly leapt behind. For the first time, Zorth watched his flagship bleed. The human fleet regrouped around the extraction vector. What followed was not retreat. It was retaliation. Admiral Grace Patterson watched the battle unfold from the bridge of the Constellation. Her fleet had suffered losses. Ships gone, voices silenced forever. But the Velry formation was collapsing. Their confidence had been their armor. It had cracked. Focus fire on Dominion's engine clusters, Grace ordered. Human ships surged forward, weapons blazing. The Velry flagship's shields failed in sections. Its engines ruptured in cascading failures. The Eternal Dominion went dark. Silence fell across Velry command channels. Zora stared at the tactical display, disbelief curdling into something colder. Defeat. Kyle Bennett sat strapped into a medical chair aboard a human hospital ship, hands trembling as painkillers finally dulled the agony. Amy worked efficiently, sealing wounds, stabilizing fractures. Nathan Drake watched from nearby. People died for me, Kyle said quietly. Yes, Drake answered, because you were worth it. Kyle closed his eyes. Hours later, the battle ended. The Velry fleet was shattered. 83 ships destroyed or disabled. Their flagship was a drifting wreck. Human losses were heavy. Names would be spoken. Families would grieve. But the Velry had learned something they had never understood before. Fear could be turned against them. Grace Patterson stood alone on the observation deck when Zorth was brought aboard. The once proud warlord looked diminished, scales dulled, posture broken. His hands were bound. For one soldier, Zorth said hoarsely, you destroyed everything. Grace didn't raise her voice. In your empire, she said, soldiers are tools. In ours, they're family. Zorth shook his head. No rational species would pay this price. That's why you lost. She stepped closer, eyes hard. You wanted fear. You created something far worse. Zorth swallowed. What? Resolve. She gestured toward the burning wreckage outside. This was not a war. This was a lesson. Later, Kyle stood beside Grace at the viewport. They called us young, he said. We are, Grace replied. Kyle smiled faintly. Young enough to still remember why we fight. The galaxy would remember this day. And so would the Velry. The galaxy did not go quiet after the battle. It watched. Across 1,000 systems, observers replayed censored data and intercepted transmissions from Velry space. What they saw confused them. A young species, outnumbered, outmatched, dismissed, had crossed half the galaxy and shattered a power that had never known defeat. And they had done it for one person. To many civilizations, that made no sense. To humanity, it made perfect sense at all. Admiral Grace Patterson spent the days after the battle doing the hardest part command. She signed casualty reports. She recorded messages to families who would never hear familiar voices again. She read names aloud, slowly, carefully, because names mattered, every one of them. She also refused every request from the Galactic Council to explain or justify her actions. When pressed, she offered only one statement. We retrieved our own. High Warden Zora sat in a containment cell aboard the Constellation, staring at nothing. He had commanded fleets. He had erased civilizations. He had never been powerless before. Grace visited him on the third day. You could have surrendered, Zora said bitterly. You could have saved thousands of your own lives. Grace folded her arms. And taught my people that their lives are negotiable? That is how empires survive. No, she replied. That is how they rot. Zorth studied her. Your species is dangerous because it refuses to be practical. Grace smiled thinly. No, we're dangerous because we remember faces. Kyle Bennett woke to sunlight. Real sunlight. Earth. The hospital overlooked a coastline he recognized from childhood. Waves rolled in steady rhythm, as if the universe had decided to breathe again. Claire sat beside his bed, holding his hand like she was afraid. He might fade if she let go. You're home, she whispered. Kyle nodded, unable to speak. Emma burst into the room moments later, launching herself into his arms with zero regard for medical equipment. You promised, she said fiercely. Kyle laughed, tears blurring his vision. I did. Rehabilitation was slow. Broken bones healed faster than broken memories. Some nights, Kyle woke drenched in sweat, hearing alarms that weren't there. Other nights, he dreamed of corridors filled with red light and silence. The ghosts visited once. Daniel's arm was in a sling. Amy looked exhausted. Marcus tried to pretend everything was fine. Nathan Drake, stood at the foot of the bed. "You did good," Drake said. "So, did you?" Drake shook his head. "You gave us something to fight for." The Velry Empire reeled. Losing ships was one thing. Losing certainty was another. World began questioning their place under Velry rule. Border systems went quiet. Rebellions whispered themselves into existence. Fear, once a weapon, turned inward. Zor was returned alive, as Grace had promised, with one condition: he would tell the truth. And he did. He spoke of human resolve, of fleets that ignored logic, of soldiers who refused to abandon one another, of an empire nearly broken over a single life. The Velry listened, and, for the first time, hesitated. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. Ambassadors argued. Analysts warned. Economists panicked. Humans were labeled reckless, unpredictable, unstable. Older species used a different word: warning. Kyle Bennett stood in his backyard 6 months later, watching Emma chase a drone through the air. The sky was blue, peaceful. Claire joined him, slipping her hand into his. "Do you miss it?" she asked gently. "The stars." He thought about it, about duty, about fire, about what it meant to stand between darkness and people you loved. "Someday," he said. "Maybe." Emma ran back, breathless. "Daddy, watch this." Kyle smiled. For now, he was exactly where he belonged. Far beyond Earth, the galaxy adjusted its calculations. One lesson spread faster than any fleet. Humans do not measure lives in numbers. They measure them in names. And if you take one, all of them will come. History did not remember the battle by its tactical designation. It remembered the reason. Across the known galaxy, analysts replayed the conflict again and again, searching for the mistake the Velry Empire had made. Some blamed arrogance. Others blamed underestimating a young species. A few claimed it was bad luck, a rare alignment of improbable events. They were all wrong. The mistake was believing humans thought like everyone else. In the months that followed, Velry-controlled systems grew quiet. Patrol routes thinned. Border garrisons requested reinforcements that never arrived. The Empire still had ships, still had soldiers, but something essential had fractured: confidence. Zoratha's testimony spread through Velry command circles like a disease. He described human officers who accepted impossible odds without hesitation. Soldiers who advanced not for glory or conquest, but because someone they loved was in danger. "That is not strategy," one Velry commander had said in disbelief. Zorath answered simply, "That is devotion." The Velry had no counter for it. The Galactic Council formally censured humanity. Privately, many ambassadors slept poorly afterward. Human diplomats were calm, almost polite, as accusations flew. When asked why they had escalated a localized incident into a full-scale fleet action, Earth's representative responded with the same sentence every time: "We retrieved our officer." No threats, no bravado, just fact. Older species, those who had survived long enough to see empires rise and fall, understood the subtext. If humanity had been willing to do this for one soldier, what would they do for a colony? A city? A world? No one wanted to find out. Admiral Grace Patterson retired 2 years later. She declined ceremonies, speeches, and medals. Instead, she requested one thing: a private memorial. 47 names were etched into stone. Not ranks, not titles, names. She stood before them alone, letting the silence speak. The galaxy called her ruthless. History would likely do the same. Grace accepted that. She knew the truth. Colonel Nathan Drake returned the Ghost Division to the shadows. New recruits arrived. Training intensified. Protocols were rewritten, not to make the Ghost more lethal, but more precise. Humanity had learned something about itself during the Velry conflict. Love, weaponized, was terrifying, and it required control. Drake visited Kyle Bennett one final time before disappearing back into classified obscurity. "You ever regret it?" Drake asked. Kyle considered the question carefully. "No," he said, "but I understand the cost now." Drake nodded. "That's all anyone can ask." Years passed. Trade resumed. Borders stabilized. The galaxy adjusted its assumptions. One rule became unspoken but universally understood. Human soldiers were off limits. Not because of treaties, because of consequences. A pirate syndicate learned that lesson the hard way. They captured a lone human freighter crew on the fringe of neutral space, assuming ransom would follow. Instead, their communications went dark within 48 hours. No declaration of war was issued. No explanation was given. The syndicate simply ceased to exist. Kyle Bennett never returned to Deep Space Command. He taught instead strategy, ethics, leadership. Cadets listened closely when he spoke, because he didn't glorify war. He talked about responsibility, about choosing people over numbers, about the weight of being worth rescuing. Sometimes, when asked why humans fought so differently, he answered with a story about a captain who stayed behind so his crew could escape. Sometimes, he didn't need to. The reputation spoke for itself. Emma grew older. She learned what her father had endured. She learned why his hand sometimes shook, why certain noises made him pause. She learned something else, too. That love was not weakness. That standing alone could move fleets. That the galaxy was vast and dark, but humans carried fire with them, far beyond Earth, in systems that had never seen a human face. Parents warned their children with new cautionary tales, not of monsters, of people. Do not harm them, the story said. Do not take what is theirs. They will cross the stars for one another. The stories always ended the same way, with a warning. The Velry Empire never recovered its former dominance. It survived, but smaller, quieter, wiser. Zorth lived out his days in confinement, studying human history. He never stopped trying to understand them. In his final recorded statement, he offered the only conclusion that made sense. Humans do not fight for territory, he said. They fight for each other. And that, he added, changes everything. Kyle Bennett had once believed home was a place, a coordinate, a gravity well, a point on a map you returned to when the mission was over. He learned, over time, that home was something far more fragile and far more powerful. It was people. The ceremony was small. No cameras. No speeches broadcast across the networks. Just a quiet gathering beneath open sky on a clear afternoon. 47 flags stood in perfect alignment. Kyle stood among families, among children who held photographs too large for their hands, among parents who smiled bravely while their eyes betrayed grief that would never fully heal. When his turn came, he didn't wear dress uniform. He wore civilian clothes. I was supposed to die out there, Kyle said, voice steady despite the weight pressing against his chest. That was the plan I chose. I stayed behind so my crew could live. He paused, letting the wind carry his words. They didn't just save me. They reminded the galaxy what a human life means. No one applauded. They didn't need to. The memorial ended at sunset. As families drifted away, Grace Patterson's name echoed quietly through conversations. Some called her a hero. Others still called her reckless. Kyle understood both. He also understood something else. Every name carved into stone was there because someone had loved them enough to refuse surrender. That night, Kyle sat on the porch with Claire, listening to crickets sing as Emma slept inside. You ever think about the stars? Claire asked. Kyle nodded. Every day. Do they call to you? Sometimes. She leaned her head against his shoulder. And what do you say back? Not yet. Across human space, policies changed. Rescue protocols were rewritten. Search and recovery budgets tripled. Training emphasized loyalty as much as tactics. Humanity did not apologize for what it had done. It codified it. Years later, cadets at the academy would study the Velry incident not as a battle, but as doctrine. Never leave your own behind. Never let fear set the terms. Never teach the galaxy that a human life is expendable. The lesson was simple. The consequences were not. In distant systems, aliens whisper about humans with something close to reverence. Some said they were insane. Others said they were dangerous. A few said they were beautiful in a terrifying way. All agreed on one thing. You do not test them. Emma Bennett stood at the edge of a launch platform many years later, watching ships rise into sky. She wore a cadet's uniform. Kyle stood beside her, older now, hair touched with gray, posture still straight. Nervous? He asked. Emma smiled. A little. Good, he said. Means you care. She looked up at him. If something happens, will they come? Kyle didn't hesitate. Yes, he said. Every time. The galaxy continued turning. Empires rose. Borders shifted. Wars came and went. But one truth endured, passed from species to species like a law of nature. Humanity does not abandon its own. Not for politics. Not for probability. Not for fear. If you take one, they will come. Across the stars. Through fire. Whatever the cost. And somewhere in the quiet space between suns, the memory of a single decision, the choice of one captain to stay behind, continued to ripple outward. A reminder that love, when backed by resolve, is stronger than any empire,